4 teams, NC State, Virginia, Florida State, and Miami, with new coaches. Obviously, the old guard at Carolina and Cuse and Duke has changed overall recently. And Jim Root of The Athletic and the Three-Man Weave podcast wrote about that last week. Always good to get a little hoops in at this time of year as we bring on Jim for the first time. Jim, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, appreciate you having me. It's good to get to chat a little bit about what I wrote. And ACC is definitely a big topic, I think, after last year and looking forward, just what they did this offseason and some of the changes they made.
All right, so NC State hired Will Wade, Virginia Ryan Odom, Florida State Luke Laux, Miami Jay Lucas. Of the 4 hires, Jim, which one popped to you the most? Was like, all right, this one has really hit the mark here.
Yeah, I think the Will Wade hire is the one I got to go with, just because of the way he's consistently won basically everywhere he's been. I think he's kind of tailor-made for this world of basketball, kind of recycling his roster year over year. He's able to do it at McNeese, and obviously well known for his strong offers down in the Bayou at LSU. But, that's not legal, and making strong offers is going to get him places in this current climate. So that one really stood out to me. I think it'll be kind of fun to see that fan base rally around him, and if they can stand up to Duke and North Carolina and make those rivalries even more heated, I think that's going to make ACC basketball even more entertaining and competitive.
You know, you look at Will Wade, and obviously, as you said, you go back to the FBI stuff at LSU, and there's violations at some schools that like people did that is still a no-no. The stuff he did right, it's basically all good now. Like, does that wash away the past? Does that stuff not matter at all for him anymore? Is there another shady element when you look at Wade that's still a little like weird?
Yeah, I'm sure there's probably some people that still used to get rubbed the wrong way because, hey, it was a rule at the time and he broke it, and that's going to bother some people. I think there was whispers that maybe the SEC commissioner or the conference just didn't really want him back because the last time he was there, he ended up getting LSU put on probation and just kind of hurt a program there. So he finds a refuge in another conference, and the ACC, I think, is probably better for it, for having him back in there. The comparison, it's a far-reaching one here, but Kelvin Sampson at Indiana got in trouble for the text messages he was sending in Indiana and, took his time away from D1 basketball and came back and was better for it. And suddenly Houston's one of the biggest powerhouses in the entire sport. And, I'm not predicting that quite for NC State and for Will Wade, but I think he can have that same kind of success getting back into the power conference level, just being the quality of coach that he is.
Yeah, who cares about the Kelvin Sampson illegal phone calls when you can now just hand somebody a bag of NIL? Like, what's a little text? Like, what's the difference here? So we got Jim Root from The Athletic and the Three-Man Weave podcast with us. A lot of conversations I had with a lot of people this season when you talk about why is the ACC down, why is the SEC thriving. Obviously hit on revenue and NIL, but a lot of people are like, look at what the SEC did in their coaching hires here in the last 4 or 5 years. The fact that this crop is so large, is this something that can kickstart the ACC again, that this new young group of coaches coming in?
Absolutely. I think it was 3 years ago, because my alma mater was part of it. I went to the University of Missouri, but the SEC hired 6 new coaches, and that was before Texas and Oklahoma were there. And some of the coaches in that crop have all really had success since then. I mean, Todd Golden is going to be the banner carrier of that group, having won a national title already in just 3 short years in Florida. But, Missouri's made 2 NCAA tournaments after really, really struggling. South Carolina got into the tournament last year after kind of a dire period for them. Lamont Paris has done a nice job there. And a couple of those other coaches have turned things around. Georgia got in the tournament. They're another one that changed coaches, hired Mike White from a conference rival like Florida. So, maybe that gives hope to somebody like Miami that's bringing in Jay Lucas across the conference from Duke, a guy that I think has gotten a really strong start to his roster so far. Just 4 new coaches, new blood, the guys that have either succeeded or, in my view, with the Florida State and Miami hires, gotten really strong, sturdy rosters to begin this offseason.
You mentioned your alma mater, Missouri, and their head coach, Dennis Gates. Like, he went 0 for, right, in the Big 12 in the SEC a couple of years ago. 0 for the league, and then turned it around into a tournament team last year. As we talk about Red Autry all the time around here. The fact that Missouri showed a little bit of patience, what does that tell you in this day and age when, results are expected immediately for new coaches?
Yeah, I think that was a good vote of confidence for him, and in his defense, or it looks good because he was able to keep a bunch of players after going 0-19. You think that's going to be full reset, roster is completely gone, and if you can keep some guys the way that Red Autry's kept, J.J. Starling, keeping him around, I think that matters a lot and speaks to the leadership and the relationship that a coach can have with players. And sure, it's probably a lot about the money that's received. I think that's generally accepted as like 90% of the reason guys are going places these days. But to stay put and to kind of see it through year 3 with Coach Autry, I think that speaks well to what Starling is, who he is, and the relationship he's got with Autry. And if Syracuse can get things turned around with the roster, I think is pretty solid based on what they've done so far this offseason. I think the patience could be rewarded there for the Syracuse administration as well.
Yeah, I guess the other side of things, right, is what Louisville did last year. You bring in Pat Kelsey and you go from an absolute grease fire to one of the best teams in the league overnight. You look at portal, you look at all the stuff, NIL, all the stuff that's out there these days. Like, should that be expected, I guess, of coaches now to do what Kelsey did last year, or was that just kind of like some magic being bottled in a one-year situation?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on even the resources. Like that's a big brand, Louisville. I think their donors were pretty fed up with the previous administration, and once they got somebody new in there with the excitement that Pat Kelsey brings, you get a little money flowing, and that's quick turnaround can happen. And Michigan's another good example of that, of a big brand that I think they went 8-24 in Juwan Howard's final season, and then Dusty May's there, and boom, they're in the Sweet 16. So I think the turnarounds can happen quick, and it helps quite a bit still if you have resources. But, I think about when we're talking about, like, Miami, I think pretty clearly has some resources with the roster pieces they've been able to pull in. I think NC State's going to rally some resources behind Will Wade. He kind of brings resources by himself. I think he did that at McNeese, some of the recruits he was able to reel in to a Southland program. But, I think some schools will be able to have that instant turnaround, and some will need to be a little more patient just because you can't get every name in the portal, and the portal might not be as fruitful and full of talent as it has in the past without these fifth-year COVID seniors. This is the first offseason that we don't have those.
All right, Jim, where are you at on the league as a whole right now? Obviously the SEC just had a historic year when you look at how many teams they got in the tournament and the whole deal. And the ACC has been down by its own standards here for the last 2, 3, 4 years. Is this a blip? Is this a down cycle? Or is this a legit concern when you look at the ACC in this NIL super conference, whatever we've got going on world right now?
All things being equal, and just if things progress forward just as they stand right now, I think it'd be more of a blip, kind of cyclical type thing that happens. That so many really good coaches have just left the league, and replacing them can be up and down. And obviously, we've had a success story with John Shire at Duke, and maybe not so much at others like Jim Larrañaga at Miami. He leaves in the middle of the season. Things get really, really disastrous there. But I think naturally, the way basketball tends to go, it would trend back up. The ultimate question is, of course, the realignment with the ACC. Are some of the big brands going to leave for football? Does that end up completely, short-circuiting their basketball goals? And that's the major concern, is that as a sport that's second in revenue to football, we're kind of at the mercy and see whatever they do ends up dictating what happens in basketball.
The report came out earlier today. The ACC is pondering the idea of going back to an 18-game conference schedule with the hope of juicing up their non-con going forward. Do you think something like that works, or is that just bailing water and just trying random stuff that's not actually going to fix anything?
I don't know. It kind of varies by conference. The Big Ten's gone to 20, and I think a lot of those schools play sort of weaker non-conference schedules because they know they're going to get so many big games in the league. Well, with the ACC, there were a lot of Q3 games, Q4 games on the schedule, and that ended up being a bit of a problem. So if they can get those tougher non-conference schedules, more chances for wins, that's when you build up the clout for the league, or even just the equity. Like the SEC had such a good non-conference schedule slate last year, and all the wins they accumulated, it really carried their reputation all through league play. The 14th best team is actually a Q2 win for everybody. So I think it's an interesting exploration. It reminds me a little, actually, of when the WCC went down from, I think, 16 to 14 a couple years back, it almost helped Gonzaga. So maybe this would end up helping somebody, the top of the conference a little bit more. But I think after the last couple of years, exploring different options, trying to figure out what could fix, the decrease in bids that the league has had so far, it's smart. It's smart to try to look at all different options, and that's one that could perhaps have some fruitful benefits.
All right, Jim, let me test drive this proposal that I've been concocting on you here. So if they're going to drop 2 games and you're going to try to juice it up, like how do you do that? Is it going out and everyone's got to go find a couple of games? Or what I kind of hate about this is, with the net rankings, how locked in conferences get to November results. Would there be any way these major conferences would be open to, like we see the ACC, SEC challenge? Could there be like an ACC Big 12 challenge in like late January or early February? Like, I think that would be a really cool data point to have out there. Or is that something that's too much of a pain in the butt to try to schedule into the way college basketball works right now?
I'd love to see it. We had that, the one-off Duke versus Illinois game at Madison Square Garden this past year that I think got a lot of people excited. It's fun to have those crossover points. A couple years back, I think it ended maybe 2 years ago. The ACC or the SEC and the Big 12 would play on a Saturday in late January, and you'd have 12 data points from there. And I think there's a lot of benefit in that because if a team is very different in January and February than it is in November and December, you want a chance to prove that outside of the kind of bubble that your conference becomes. It's basically, the point you're making. I'd love to see it. Bracket busters at the mid-major level back in the day was, I thought, really beneficial to the sport, and not just in terms of like teams building resume. I think it's helpful for fan interest too to have those games. So I would be all aboard that proposal.
Yeah, and obviously it's all got to do with television programming as well. I mean, the reason the ACC was playing 20 in the first place was because of the ACC network. So if you're going to take 2 away, you better end up with some programming to put on these TV channels going forward. All right, Jim, before I let you go, you've hit Syracuse a little bit. What do you make of where Syracuse is at? Obviously the ACC being down, like Syracuse being down is part of that. What do you make of, post Jim Boeheim Syracuse and what needs to happen here?
Yeah, I think it's similar to, the ACC's impact with Louisville being down. Like, those are 2 big brands, Syracuse and Louisville. You needed them for the strength of the conference to both be at their peak. And now with Louisville back, pressure turns to Syracuse. And, I think this is kind of the make or break year for Red Autry. I think the roster offers a possibility of making the postseason and bringing a point guard from across the conference in Nate George, who's pretty well proven at that level. I think the role players with Nate Kings, William Kyle, some of the pieces they got in the portal complement J.J. Starling, your kind of headliner, and you get that big leap from Johnny Freeman, the guy with all the pedigree and clout coming from last season. Really, the roster starts to look pretty solid, and the freshmen can offer some depth. Carmelo's son, Keon Anthony, really exciting too. So I think this is the pivotal year. If it doesn't go that well, another float around 500, don't be near the bubble, I think the Syracuse administration is going to have to make a decision and maybe look outside of the Jim Boeheim tree and just try to find the best possible coach to lead that program to success.
Yeah, it does feel like an awfully pivotal season around here, Jim. That is for sure. All right, man. Great to chat for the first time. I'm sure we'll touch base again down the line, but really appreciate a few minutes here today. Thanks a lot.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
All right, there he is, Jim Root. Check him out. Great article on the new ACC coaches on The Athletic. Also does the 3-Man Weave podcast where they talk about basketball. You understood that. They talk about basketball. Thanks to Jim for hopping on first time. We'll certainly have him on down the line again here on this hour, brought to you by William Mattar. We'll take a break now. Your calls next, 315-437-7644. And how did I not mention this before? Syracuse's newest football player, Cam Pringle, has a side hustle, has he's got a little something. He's got a little fun on the side that maybe there's an overlap with a now former Syracuse basketball player. How's this all going to come together? Yeah, we'll figure this out as we roll along here. After this, it's Q Sports Talk and ESPN Radio.